Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins and I'm delighted to be joined by Donal Greene. Donal, you're very welcome to the podcast. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself to our worldwide audience today. So over to you, Donal.
Thank you very much, Simon. It's great to be here and thanks a lot for the invitation. So my name is Donal Greene. I'm originally from Dundalk in the northeast of Ireland, but I've been based here in Bratislava in Slovakia for the last 11 years. So quite some time, actually. What I do mainly is, so I'm the CEO and founder of Trustmatic. Trustmatic is a remote identity verification and fraud prevention platform. So we essentially help companies and organizations prove that their users really are who they claim to be. And we do that using computer vision and biometrics. As well as leading Trustmatic for the past 2 years, I'm also the founder of Uroda. Uroda is a company based in Uganda. And this kind of came up during the COVID pandemic with a friend who's from Uganda. We decided to found a company which eventually turned out to be a ginger farm, growing ginger on 13 acres of land. But more importantly, it's a project for the local community. So in the past couple of years, we've managed to put a permanent source of water in the local community in Uganda, which they never had before. And also side projects like biogas toilets and stuff like that. So that's what I do mainly. I split my time between those two projects, but most of it is spent, of course, with Trustmatic, which is the main focus of my attention these days.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Donal. And that already sounds really busy. I wasn't aware of the work that you were doing in Uganda. So that's somebody you were working with and you decided to set this up in a ginger plant farm. Is that what you said?
Yeah, so I've done a lot of work in Africa over the last 10 years, mostly in my previous job with Innovatrics, where I ran Europe, Middle East, Africa business development. And I really had an interest in sort of exploring and finding out more about Africa, because it was always kind of trips. You'd go somewhere, usually we work with governments, so you were there for a couple of days and you didn't get a chance to see the country in its true glory, let's say. And this was at the time when the COVID pandemic, I think, gave everybody a chance to breathe and kind of reflect on what they're doing with their lives and what they're focusing on. And purely by coincidence, I met a new friend, a guy from Uganda who's based here in Slovakia. And we started talking about things we could do together. You know, he had a really good local network there. I was willing to invest into a project, you know, something small. So over a couple of years, we decided to literally fly out to Uganda and buy some land. We didn't know yet what we were going to do with it, but we knew that our key principles were it had to be something that would eventually become self-sustainable and something that had a positive impact on the local community. So over the next couple of months, we cleared the land, got it ready for planting, and eventually decided on a ginger crop to plant into the ground there.
That's incredible. And that's Uroda Ventures. Am I getting that right?
Uroda Ventures, yeah.
Yeah, very, very good. And just, I mean, it may just be my ignorance, but why ginger?
The reason we chose ginger was probably because we knew about our own incompetence, I would say. So when you plant any sort of crop, you need to be sensitive of, you know, its timelines and how long you can keep it in the soil and stuff like that. Because of COVID, obviously, we didn't know how we'd be able to export it when the time came for shipping. So we picked ginger because at its point of maturity, you can still keep ginger in the ground for around 18 months. At the same time, it's a quite high value and high demand crop. So that's why we arrived at the decision. It's a very expensive one to get into the ground, though. So it required quite a big investment at the beginning. And
you also brought water to that area, obviously.
We did, yeah. So the area where we bought the land is about an hour north, well, yeah, more like an hour and a half north of Kampala. It's a place called Nakasongola. And if you can imagine, so there's like a main road, and then our piece of land is about 10 kilometers off the main road. So you have to go totally off-road. A normal car wouldn't get you there. And unfortunately, it's an extremely impoverished area. So the people would live primarily in mud huts, so, you know, non-permanent structures. They'd have absolutely no electricity, even no basic sanitation. So when we got there, I guess the plan started to formulate more as we saw, you know, the situation on the ground. We said the first priority will be to get water into the ground. So we dug a 90-meter borehole. So that was quite a big operation to get trucks and stuff like that on the site to actually dig down and get the permanent source of water. There were things like geophysical surveys before that, et cetera, et cetera. But the net result is that the local community, which is about 100 families, they now have, for the first time ever, a permanent source of water. So that saves their kids from having to walk 5 or 6 kilometers each direction with big cans to fill with water. So that was, look, if that project does nothing else, for me, the fact that we've done that is a huge thing.
That's wonderful, Donal. I didn't realize that you were involved in that to the degree that you were. That's a wonderful thing to do during, I suppose, during the pandemic as well. So congratulations on that. The other thing I want to go back to, because you mentioned it at the start, is obviously the world of Trustmatic. Now, for people that aren't maybe as familiar with what Trustmatic does, could you maybe unpack that a little bit for our audience? Because it's a really important area, particularly in this day and age.
Sure. So what Trustmatic does I think it's been accelerated by the pandemic. So if you can imagine a normal company like a phone shop, for example, it's a good example. So when you wanted to change your SIM card or open a new line or something like that pre-pandemic, the likelihood is you'd go to that phone shop, you'd bring your ID in your hand, they'd verify that you are who you say you are, and they'd serve you face to face. But because of the pandemic and also because of general digitization trends that were there before the pandemic, a lot of organizations realized very quickly that they need to be able to interact with their customers without being face to face. And at the same time, to have a degree of trust that they know the customer is who they claim to be, and that it's not somebody impersonating the customer or committing some sort of fraud. So this is where the whole area of remote identity verification pretty much grew up. In my previous company, I had some exposure to that because we worked in biometric technology. So the simplest use case I can tell you is, let's say you might open a bank account with Revolut, or you might open an account on Airbnb or something like that. During those registration processes, those companies will ask you to take a picture of your ID card and take a selfie. Now, for you, it seems like a very simple operation, but in the background, there are computer vision and biometric algorithms which make sure that your ID card is real, that it's really you on it, that the selfie is really your face and not a deepfake or a mask or something like that. So that's basically the problem that we tried to solve with our technology.
And that must be getting quite complicated now with the development of AI, the speed at which deepfakes are getting better and better. It must be very complex behind the scenes, Donal.
It is very complex. There's a couple of areas probably that are, I would say, the main weaknesses, especially if companies use legacy vendors, which might have been, the best around 5 or 6 years ago, but maybe haven't innovated to the extent that they should have. So still, in the use cases that I mentioned, it's relatively easy, if you have an idea what you're doing, to use a fake or AI generated ID to claim to be somebody else, to use a picture of somebody or a deep fake of somebody or a video injection attack to actually create either synthetic identities or to claim somebody else's identity. And that problem, like in the USA last year, it's a $56 billion problem. People lost $56 billion because of identity theft.
Wow, that's staggering. And as you say, if you're using legacy systems, and when we think of legacy systems historically, you think of things that are maybe 10, 15, 20 years old, but you're talking legacy in terms of the last maybe 5 years, because it's moving on so quickly. And I know in your role as CEO there, I suppose in addition to what you're doing in Uganda, but you spend a lot of time, don't you, between whether it's Bratislava or you're in the States, you're in Ireland. I mean, you're truly international at this stage. So you must have customers all over.
Yeah, so pretty much any software as a service company, which is essentially what we are, I think you have to have a global mindset by default. For us, it was never going to be a case of, look, let's become, number 2 or 3 in Slovakia, then extend to Czech Republic, and then let's go slowly from there. I think that you just don't get the pace of growth that you need to be a major global player if you do it that way. Or maybe it takes 10 years, which is not what we're in this for. We want to be a relatively fast growing company. So yeah, we basically launched our product this time last year after about a year of development. We're up to about 15 customers now. So they're located here in Central and Eastern Europe. They're located in the US. We have a couple in Africa, 1 or 2 in the UK and Ireland. So yeah, I spend my time between here in Bratislava, Riga, which is where we have our development team in Latvia. And I recently went to the US, to the Bay Area in San Francisco for 3 weeks, because we have I would say maybe 1/3 of our customers are based there. And that's obviously where we see if we're going to be a truly scaling software as a service company, that's where we probably be based, in the medium term anyway.
Well, continued success with both of those areas. I mean, it is incredible, and the work that you're doing in terms of that fraud detection and the identity verification, I think, is so critical. And anybody who's had their identity taken or misused or been subject to fraud or been scammed, they realize how important it is now. And the fraudsters, in inverted commas, are getting much more sophisticated. So it's good that companies like Trustmatic and your expertise, obviously, that you bring into that role is helping people to prevent that kind of activity. The other thing I wanted to ask you, because I want to change gear a little bit while we're here, Donal, is I wanted to ask you about your own learning style. I like to ask my guests, do they read books? Are they an audiobook person? Do they like podcasts? Do they just like talking to people? Do you, at the end of your day with everything you're going on, do you just want to turn on Netflix and forget about everything? How does that work for you? What kind of things do you find yourself drawn to?
Yeah, so I mean, I do try to avoid Netflix, but usually the Formula One documentary comes up every couple of months, and that's one that I'd always watch out for. So if I watch TV, I'll watch something, generally speaking, that's about high-performing sports people. That's a kind of genre that I really like, because I think there are so many parallels between being a high-performing sports person and being a high-performing business person. In terms of my learning style, any startup which is in the stage that we're at, i.e. like less than 5 years old, it's pretty much a very chaotic environment. So my learning style is very practical. I give you an example. When you start to talk to investors and venture capital firms, you get a baptism of fire in the area of, term sheets and convertible loans and all of these kind of things. And you obviously don't want to have to hire lawyers for every step along the way. So you want to educate yourself so you gain new skills, and you can also use those in future investments that you might be party to. So a really good book, if anybody is in a situation like we are, it's a book called Secrets of Sand Hill Road. It's basically an A to Z of how venture capital works, how term sheets work, what good negotiation parameters are, and those kind of things. So my reading style and the style of gaining new information is around what are my current challenges for the next 2 or 3 months? What are the areas where I have a huge blind spot? Because quite often you have things you've never done before. And then where can I get the best quality practical information that I can digest as fast as possible? So sometimes that's books. Other times it's podcasts. If I'm looking for a little bit more of a relaxation type thing, I'll listen to something like the High Performance Podcast, which is a really good one on Spotify. But in general, it's driven by what I need to learn or what I don't know that I should know, and I'll go and find resources on that.
Thanks for sharing that, Donal. That's very, very interesting. Yeah, and that's a great book for people that are entering that VC world, that raising money world, because that is also a complicated topic that people have to grasp with. So I like that a lot. The other question I want to ask you is, throughout your career, now it could go back to your childhood, it could be something that happened to you in the US recently, but has there been people that you look up to, that admire, that have inspired you? When I ask you that question, is it a particular character trait, or are there people that spring to mind?
I mean, there are probably a few individuals that I could mention, but it's probably more around character traits. So again, when you found a startup, you're always looking for people who have, gone down that road before and successfully exited. That's usually the holy grail for a startup, is to get a successful exit at a good valuation. So I try to find as much material on those people as I can, find interviews and podcasts with them, and get an idea of their mentality. But I first and foremost, I was a sports person when I was younger. That was what I did. I wasn't very studious or didn't focus much on my education. So I still go back to high performing sports people with a killer mentality. So people I like to listen to are Roy Keane, for example. Roy Keane, of course, is in the media. He's obviously paid to be controversial. But I think what I like about his personality is he's not a sheep. He doesn't follow the crowd. He doesn't follow the thought patterns of everybody else. He's not afraid to say exactly what he thinks, even if it's unpopular. And I think in the long term, there's a lot of virtue in that, in being yourself and being true to your own opinions. So people like that, I think in different phases of your life or in different contexts, you have different people who inspire you. I would give a shout out, of course, to my mum. She's definitely a great source of inspiration, again, through different stages of life. You know, now she's taking care of our two grandparents. Both of them are in their mid-90s. So she's doing a lot of work with them. She took care of us as a single mom when we were growing up in Dundalk. And she's a very selfless person. So always puts other people first. So definitely she's number one on the list. And from a more business perspective, it's more about the character traits that I would look for.
I love that. And you're really touching on your Irish roots there, Donal, you know, but mom in Dundalk looking after the grandparents, and Roy Keane of all people, you know, who, you know, as a player, I'm thinking back to his World Cup discussions when that became sort of global news around the world, but a very passionate sports person, you know, and I can see that from your sporting background yourself, and you know, that love of sports, whether it's Formula One now or looking, and that relationship between sports and business is very strong actually, isn't it? So that makes a lot of sense.
It is, yeah. And I think people like Roy Keane with their personality and other successful people in business, you look at, you know, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, etc., they always walk that very thin line, and they're always a sort of a Marmite personality. That there are two camps on Roy Keane, right, in Saipan. But for me, in order to be super successful or achieve your goals in life, you're not going to please everybody. And those are the people who aren't afraid to say, this is how I see things. And some people agree and some people don't agree. So for me, that's a great virtue to have in your personality.
Thanks, Donal. And then again, going back to either your childhood or again, something that happened to you recently, what about the best advice you've ever received? You know, has there been any advice that you've been given in life or in business that stuck with you, that you really hold on to, that you think is very valuable? Or is there advice that you often find yourself imparting to others that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, there are a couple of things that stick out. So a friend of mine who runs a really successful, it's not a startup anymore, but it was a startup maybe 10 years ago here in Slovakia. He gave me some advice, which was don't work with assholes. But I turned that around a little bit, and I made it a little bit more friendly sounding. And my advice to that, my version of that advice is, do your best to only work with people you like. For me, that's important because in our capitalist world, you can focus on, you know, building up revenue and getting as many clients as possible, which of course is important. But for me, with, you know, our 15 customers we have now, and hopefully will be much more than that by the end of the year, I want to see that if one of those calls me on my phone and I see his name on my phone, I'm looking forward to chatting to him, because that makes my work, you know, a pleasure to do rather than a chore. So that's quite an important piece. Other than that, one of the guys actually in San Francisco, he's also a startup founder from Slovakia. They're a little bit ahead of us in terms of where they are. They're a much more established company. And his biggest thing is just don't listen to them. Don't listen to them. Don't listen to the people who are negative. Don't listen to the haters. Don't listen to the people who criticize you. Unless, of course, it's qualified and fair criticism. In some cases, you need to take that on board. But in general, just be positive. Listen to yourself. Listen to your close circle of people, but ignore the noise around you.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Donal. Thanks for sharing that advice. And it's funny, I've been talking to people recently, and they've, you know, a couple of conversations that have came up have been about how people have actually cut customers that don't fit the type of customer they want to deal with, which is very hard to do when you're chasing revenue and growth and scale. And I was talking to another person who has a community, online community, which has grown really, really fast over the last number of years. But they were talking me through how very fast they are to remove people from the community that don't fit the type of traits that community stands for. And I think often it's hard to do that. But I think what you said there in terms of, you know, working with people that you like, that you can trust, where you look forward to that conversation, it's not always easy. And I'm sure there are difficult conversations in business too. But I don't know whether it's a post-pandemic thing where we've shifted our thinking a little bit, but people are realizing that life is maybe short, maybe precious, and doing business with people that you like, that you trust, that you admire, that you want to work with, I think is more important now than ever, maybe. The other thing I wanted to ask you before we run out of time is whether you're jetting off to the States, whether you are in Uganda or, you know, across Europe, what does the next 6 to 12 months look like for Donal Greene? What are you hoping to achieve? Is it scaling your business? Is it attracting those new clients? What does the next 6 to 12 months look like for you? And what are you hoping to achieve, Donal?
Yeah, so the next 6 to 12 months, it came up on my Facebook memories. It's a year to the day since I was in Uganda the last time, and some great memories of that. So definitely in the next, let's say 3 to 4 months, I'd like to get there at least for a week to check up on the project, because Martin, my business partner, has kind of taken over the running of that because of my priorities being elsewhere. So definitely I want to get to Uganda and make sure that, I know things are going well, but just to check in with people and even see some old friends and stuff like that. On the Trustmatic side of things, despite what I said earlier, we are all about growth now. So we've had our year one where it was, slowly going and testing stuff with customers and getting feedback and changing things. This year is about scaling up. So we'll be scaling up both in terms of our revenue, our number of customers, and on our team. So a nice goal for me by the end of the first half of the year would be that when I go fundraising or when I go doing other things, that I know that everything will be taken care of back in the office, that I have great people in the team who I can essentially hand over a lot of things that I currently do to. So that's important. I guess that's it. Yeah, we have our targets that we want to hit by the end of the year. I'd like to think we can achieve that or even overachieve it, and that we've built something that's a good company that people like to work with and work for.
Yeah, and I suppose after that year of operations, you have some really great customers now. So there's a great use case there. You've got that sort of traction. You've got that momentum. You've got people using your services. And, when it comes to raising the next round, going down the VC route and really scaling your business, that all helps, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely helps. I think that, founders can get obsessed with raising money from VCs. My advice, if at all possible, like we bootstrapped with a very small amount of our own money for the first almost 2 years. My advice is just get something out in terms of a product that will solve some problems for some people, get them to pay for it as much as they're willing to pay, and only then think about going to raise money. Because if you raise money at a point where your product isn't finished or you don't have revenue, I think you end up giving away too much and raising, too little. So if you can at all, bootstrap as much as possible, and only then raise when you've got even 10K per month in recurring revenue. That's a totally different picture compared to going in with just an idea where they'll take, 30 or 40% of your idea, and then you're working for them more than for yourself,
Yeah, great advice. And the last thing I wanted to ask you, Donal, is there anything else that I haven't mentioned that you want to bring to the attention of our international audience? And also, and importantly, if people want to get in touch with you about the work you're doing in Uganda, and particularly around Trustmatic and the services that you offer there, where's the best place that people can get in touch with you?
Sure. No, Simon, I don't think there's anything that I'd like to bring up that we haven't mentioned. What I would maybe say to everybody listening, it's obviously a global podcast. In my previous job, I had the privilege to travel to more than 60 countries because of work, and I've got networks of people in all corners of the world. So if anybody feels that what they're doing, it has to, of course, somehow align with what we're doing. But if they'd like to talk to me about ideas in different geographies around the world, or how to go to market in certain areas, or if I can help them by leveraging my network, that they can absolutely feel free. I'm a very open person on LinkedIn. I'll respond to everything and consider all proposals. So definitely they can feel free to reach out to me. And probably LinkedIn is the best place to get in touch with me. So I'm fairly active there. It's obviously my name, Donal Greene, Donal without a D and Greene with an E. That's always difficult to explain, but yeah, I'm available there, and I'll definitely respond to people if they do reach out.
Well, that's great. And that's a nice place for us to bring this episode to a close. So thank you to Donal Greene for being here on the Global Discussion. Thank you to everybody for watching or listening around the world. Be sure to follow, like, subscribe, do all the things I need you to do to help support this podcast. And I hope you'll join me back here for more discussions with leaders, creative people, thinkers, and we'll see you soon. Thanks a lot, Donal. It's been an absolute pleasure to catch up with you. Continued success this year, my friend.
Thank you very much, Simon. Appreciate it. All the best.